World War I was over. The military had a surplus of Curtiss JN-4s, or Jennies, and Standard airplanes.
The government just sold them to get rid of them, and they sold them really cheap. You could buy a Curtiss Jenny or a Standard for $200, which probably cost $5,000 for the government to build. The original barnstorming pilots were guys that returned from the war or were trained to fly in World War I. And after the war, there was no use for pilots, and they actually didn't have jobs, so they wanted to fly more. So they created this whole industry for themselves. They picked these up and started flying, and it gave them the freedom of working for themselves and flying around the country giving rides.
The name barnstorming came from politicians giving speeches, people giving lectures, and theatrical performers who traveled around the country, usually to rural areas where they used a barn as a stage or backdrop. Hence, pilots who landed on farms.
The way it worked was the people in rural America, they'd never seen an airplane. They've heard about them, and they read exploits about the war, but they'd never really seen an airplane. And if a barnstormer would get his airplane and fly out across the country, and he'd pick a town with a nice field, has to be a pretty good-sized field, you would negotiate with the farmer for the use of the field. And in payment for using the field, he would get 10% of the ride money, or his family would get free airplane rides. It was a big deal. The town would actually pretty much shut down, and everybody would go out to see this airplane because it was a pretty neat thing and nothing that they'd ever seen before but had heard about, so they wanted to see it, and then they wanted to experience it because it's the industrial age. You got electricity just recently, and the cars are showing up, and here's this airplane, and it was just amazing to them, and they wanted to participate. The barnstormer pilot would offer rides for maybe $3 or $5 a piece. So in a given day, he could make almost all that money back that he paid for this airplane if he didn't break the thing or break a prop or something. As far as stunting, the barnstormers, the reason they would do that was to attract people out to the field. So they would fly into a small town, and first thing you had to do was get everybody's attention. You would take off and fly around the town and do some loops and maybe buzz the town real low so the town knew you were there, and then they would watch to see where the airplane landed, and they would come out. When they would advertise where the barnstormer was going to be, everybody knew where the Johnson farm was, so they would just publicize that or put flyers up, and people would know right where to go to see the airplane.
Performing a variety of stunts from loop-the-loop, barrel rolls, spins, and wing walking. Competition between barnstormers for customers saw the tricks getting more dangerous. The perception was that the public needed to be protected.
They did actually take real good care of their equipment because that was their livelihood. But these airplanes sat outside, and they're made out of wood and fabric, cotton fabric, and there was no hangars, there was no airports, and they got beat up, and the storms would tear them up, and it got more and more expensive. The companies that were surplusing the airplanes started raising the prices because they knew these guys were making money with them. What really ended it was in 1926, the Air Commerce Act, the federal government imposed regulations on flying. You had to have a pilot's license. The airplanes had to be licensed. The mechanics had to be licensed. And you had all kinds of rules about the stunting. And it really put a hurt on the barnstormers.
80 years later, barnstorming is still going on.
I participate in barnstorming type things. I'm a historian, and I really like the history of it, so to participate is kind of a way of experiencing what they did back then. And barnstorming today is, in a way, kind of the same, because the people in the 20s had never seen an airplane before in a farmer's field. Well, today everyone is pretty used to aviation, and aviation to them is big jetliners and things, but they see an old biplane in a farmer's field, that's almost the same impact as they had in the 20s. And if you're giving someone their first airplane ride, it's still their first airplane ride, and they're going to remember that.
Today, barnstormers can't do the stunts they did in the 20s due to regulations. Just seeing the antique planes is usually enough to draw a crowd.
Things we do for the people, the balloon busting. flower bombing, that's perfectly fine. The candy drop, that's, as long as it's prearranged and you take some safety precautions, that's all well and good, and the kids really like that. The main reaction you get barnstorming today is people don't realize that this kind of thing still happens. They don't even realize these old airplanes are still around. But the antique airplane guys restore these things better than in new condition, and we fly them around and share them with the public, and they get a big kick out of it. You take a kid for a ride for the first time, and you put them in the front seat, and you tell them how the airplane works, and then you let them fly the airplane. And here you got a 9-year-old kid, all of a sudden he's flying an airplane, and that's a big impact on someone that age. And a lot of people that I've given rides to have careers in aviation. Barnstorming was extremely important to aviation. It did a couple things. It exposed the general public to aviation and proved to them that it was safe and a usable means of transportation. It also, helped create the mail routes and the airline industry that we know today.